Hello and good afternoon. So we are having technical problems. So fortunately, Rick had some problems with the tech side of things, and then we were literally just ready to. We're like, come on, let's go with it, and then it wouldn't go. So I'm just checking just to make sure that we are actually live. We should be live. So anyway, the joys of technology, I would say, shall we? Anyway, it's great for everyone to join us today. If you are joining us, let us know where you're dialing in from. What countries? Here we go. I'm just checking now. Looks like we are going live. There you go. So let us know where you're dialing in from. I always like to know what countries people are from. It's really cool to see. And Rick, so you're traveling today.
I
We
am.
have and we haven't done one of these for a really long time, so it's really nice to see you.
Well, pleasure to have you. By the way, have me as well. Melanie, you're amazing. I'm glad to have this conversation. This is a conversation we constantly hear with our customers, and so thank you for having me. Even though it is currently 6 a.m. here on the West Coast.
Oh my God, so that's a proper early morning. Okay, well, I appreciate I'm not very good at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm just going to be transparent on that one. So I appreciate that. It's really it's great that you join us. So we're talking about global payroll transformation playbook from chaos to clarity. And I will say chaos to clarity is a really good topic, isn't it? Like a really good thing to say about payroll transformation. So let me just pull this away and then we can see, there you go, we can see you even better now, Rick. That's great. So first of all, for those of you that don't know Rick, do you want to just introduce yourself? I'm sure everyone knows you, but just in case.
Sure. So, Rick Hamill, founder and CEO of Globally. Globally, we are a global workforce management platform. We operate in 127 countries, and we provide a more streamlined way to process global payroll or to pay your global teams, if it's from flexible employment, contractor pay, or global payroll. Our go to market actually is really we built a gross net engine in 127 countries, leveraging AI to make payroll more simplistic. So when we talk about going from chaos to clarity, that's our mission. We want to make sure we make things a lot more simplistic. So this topic is it's on topic for us as an organization. It's something that we're constantly looking at. And look, today I'm going to talk about some of the things we've learned, some things I've learned in my past. But I've been in payroll for quite some time. I'm going to date myself a little bit, Melanie, here, almost 20 years in HR. So I look at this from someone that's been in HR, someone that's been in payroll, some of the woes that I've had, some of the struggles that I've had. You guys don't see it in my beard because I dyed my beard, but there's a lot of white hairs here from those those lessons learned. So super excited to dive in and kind of talk about this topic.
Well, I'm dyeing my hair to try and blend in the greys as they're coming through. So I'm in the same session. So a few people just said as the session started. So we did unfortunately have a few tech issues. So hopefully those of you that are joining us now can see us and can hear us. So we've got some guys from Barcelona, and then we have India. So and Stefania, great. I'm glad that you can see us now. So okay, right. Global payroll transformation. It is a big topic, isn't it? But what does it actually mean? Like in real world, what does global payroll transformation actually mean?
Well, look, I've been in payroll look, I'm gonna date myself again when payroll was Excel files, global payroll was Excel files, and you're uploading and through email or through a SharePoint. Um, so going from something that's more chaotic, something that's more just and multiple providers, multiple distributed, it's someone that you're going from what I call a not organized process to where you're actually evolving into technology. That to me, I think is the most important component of that. It's how do you actually take kind of disruption, manual processes and procedures and implement that into a process that's a little bit more streamlined from that perspective. We've seen organizations come in and say, look, I think technology is going to solve everything. And look, I want to be very clear, technology is not going to solve your payroll components. You really need to understand what transformation means, and that means implementing process and procedures. That's implementing change. That's also getting buy-in from multiple departments. Payroll is not just a solo department. It has it's influenced by HR, finance, and other organizations. So transformation from that perspective is putting together process and procedures, looking at how you're going to implement and execute, and then actually you leveraging technology to implement what you're looking to do within the organization.
So that sort of brings me quite nicely to what do leaders underestimate the most? Is it that they need the procedures in place before they do anything?
Well, statistics show, Melanie, that most payroll transformations and HR transformations fail. And the reason why is, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of, they think that technology is going to solve that. So I always recommend, especially with our clients when we're bringing them on, and we're talking about clients that have thousands of employees. These are not the ones and twosies. These are thousands of employees in multiple countries. They've come in and said, look, we're looking to consolidate. We want to have a global view, and we want to be able to do this in a way that's not going to cost us a lot of money or a high risk of failure. And so we've always said to them, look, our technology can help them with that, but we really need to sit down and actually look at what you're doing in each country, understand what your processes and procedures are. And payroll is one of the hardest departments to make change because we're so used to it. The saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But it's 2026. It's time to still improve it. We still have to improve it from that perspective. But there's a lot of, because it works, because this has been processed, you get a lot of pushback in how to implement that change. And so taking the time to really understand what you're looking to do, understanding the risk behind that as well, and understanding the reward behind it, I think is really key. But taking the time to actually build that process out, a good payroll provider is going to sit down and actually help you with a plan and help you understand what that implementation is going to look like, and then have checkpoints and validation points to ensure that your project's going the right direction. If you're not doing that, if you're just looking to take Excel files, upload them into a system, and expect it to work magically, that's not really what's going to happen. But it's really taking the time to understand your project plan. One thing that we always inform our customer base is, although we provide you a implementation manager, we also suggest that you have a project manager on your end as well. And that project manager is the one that's liaison to your organization and within your other departments. Again, we said payroll is not a solo department. You've got dependencies within other parts of the organization. So that project manager is really there leading that transformation for you and getting buy-in from the partners within the organization.
Because you said good payroll partners help you sort of get organized. But I think from the GPA perspective, there are still issues with payroll providers not providing that support, and then you go for a transformation and then it fails. But it's almost like you don't. I don't want to be that person to say, okay, this doesn't sound right. But you hear it so often that the preparation isn't done, and the provider isn't necessarily hand holding to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think part of that is because there's a technology play behind it. And when you're talking to partners, I think this is why asking questions, we've had this conversation before, Melanie, it's how do you vet the right vendor? How do you go through an RFP process and understand how they're going to support, understand who the roles and responsibilities between the partner. But really when you're looking at overall, a good partner is going to sit down and say, okay, it's not just about the sell, right? It's about making sure this works. I've had many conversations with people. We just did a world tour roadshow, which you were part of, where we had some of these conversations about transformation. And the big one was, I've worked with ABC company, this large payroll providing company or a large software company or well-known organizations, and their transformations. They just said it failed, and it, like, again, using these large organizations and softwares that are supposed to work, why wasn't it working? Well, a lot of it is not just the implementation of it from a software perspective. Is if you're expecting processes to just magically appear in your software, that's not going to work. You really need to understand what that looks like. You need to have a game plan. And realistically, I just was speaking to a prospect the other day, and when I have conversations with them and they say, "Oh, we're still going to do manual processes," and like, well, the technology can solve that. And they go, "Well, we still want to do manual processes." Well, you're implementing something that you know could actually fail because you're not leveraging technology the correct way. So it's the buy-in from the partner helping you with that, but it's also the buy-in that you need from the business. And one thing I'll always say is you need a partner that's going to tell you no, and
Yeah.
push back sometimes. And I know that, as you know, it contradicts customer service when you say that, right? The customer's always right. We've always heard that in the industry. Customer's always right. But sometimes it's a good partner is the one that's going to challenge you and help you understand, hey, there's a better way to do it, and there's a way that you can save time and effort and money while you're actually implementing these particular solutions if you do it this way. Here's what we've seen work successfully. Here's when we see things fail. And I think that sometimes in implementations or when you work with partners, they don't really want to have those tough conversations. Their goal is to make you go live, but going live can also mean that you're going to fail.
Yeah, so you're talking about the manual processes. Do you think it's the thing of where people just really don't want to let go of Excel? Do you?
Yeah, it's also comfortability, right? I know, because payroll, again, we have to be very honest, payroll is very sensitive. It actually impacts the livelihood of every employee in your organization, and it impacts employee morale. We talked about this before, where if you mess up 2 pay cycles, an employee is going to start looking for a new job. That's a statistic and a fact out there. So people are very nervous about change because there's a possibility of failure. And if they know this is what I've done for so many years and I know this works, I'm going to continue to do my process. So it's that buy-in process. One thing that we like to do is when we do mock payrolls, it's not just, oh, submit your payrolls and let's see if it works. We're actually training our customers. We're helping them implement processes. We're working through what that looks like for them, so that they understand within that 2 cycle that we do payroll runs, that they understand how they're building that muscle and how to leverage our system, implement their processes, what's not working in their processes, so that when they're ready to go live, it actually works. And we also bring in consultants to really support them from a project basis as well. So we really look at bringing kind of a 360 kind of view on that project for that overall transformation. And so it's really taking the time with the customer to say, okay, what's the plan? How do we want to execute it? Who's responsible for what? I think that's another thing that's really clear. And then how do we make sure that actually gets implemented correctly? And I think any payroll transformation or HR transformation needs that time to sit back and really put together a plan for success, and flexibility to make adjustments while you're implementing that plan.
Yeah, flexibility, I think, is pretty key. Well, the people that I've met within the industry who had huge transformation projects, they presented, this is what we did. And then at the end of the presentation, I've gone, okay, how smoothly did it go? What did you have to play about with? Which countries did you want to implement first of all, but you ended up at the end? And I do think flexibility does seem to be key to get something delivered, because sometimes some countries are a lot harder than others, and not understanding that. I think Spain is sometimes overlooked as quite a complex country.
Yeah, depending on where you are in the world, and Europe, a lot of companies are very used to 13, 14-month cycles. They're used to implementing change when they switch providers. But it's interesting. I just had a conversation with a US company the other day who realized that they weren't actually processing their payroll compliantly when we were looking at transferring their year-to-date information over to us. And they told us, like, we said, oh, so are you processing your 13-month payroll or 14th month? Can you send those year-to-dates in that so we can actually take a look at that? And they were like, what do you mean 13-month payroll? And I said, well, according to your CBA, you're supposed to be processing 14 cycles a year. How are you processing? Oh, we didn't realize that. No one told us that we weren't doing it correctly. And I said, well, your payroll provider didn't review your CBA. So that simple little thing of making sure that you're processing payroll correctly based on process and procedures and law that you have in place, I think is a really good first start, is really understanding what you actually have and what you need to do before you do any transformation. You really need to understand what that looks like. Now, simplistically for them, they can we can update the CBA, we can make some changes to that, we can make addendums to their contracts. Those are things that we can support. But the fact is, it's not just getting into a system, it's really understanding what you're processing. And that's what I think makes it different from business transformation. When you're looking to actually implement new software, is really making sure that you, from the ground up, you're building that.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you say that, because we had one person within the industry I was talking to at our summit, and they had a M&A, merger and acquisition, and the company that they took over they realised, so the payroll was being processed in a European country for another European country, but they didn't understand the legislation in the other European country, and yeah, so this person came in and just said, wow, this really is not correct, and you're going to cause a lot of issues with the local government, and let's get prepared, because there's going to be quite a lot of questions. So I suppose with M&As as well, that can cause issues, because you're finding out what you're taking on board, and as payroll leaders as such, you find that out, I would assume, a little bit later once the M&A's gone through.
So this gets back to the question of being a payroll being more strategic and at the table.
Yeah.
Now that's a topic we talk about quite often here. But when we're looking at payroll, I think payroll leaders should be part of the due diligence process when you're doing any type of M&A. They can ask those questions. They can validate that information. I've seen just a plethora of things. I actually partnered with a number of PE firms as well and help them with due diligence and kind of walk them through some of the things that they need to look at. And it's very interesting. We've had a situation recently with a firm that I was helping kind of look at due diligence with. They came in and they found out, similar to what you just said, they were a Austrian company and they were hiring employees out of Austria for a number of European countries. And when we asked them that, they said, "Well, we can actually process payroll in Austria for the employees in these different countries because they all work in the European Union." And we are like, "Well, that's actually not true." And so when we walk through kind of those processes, we realized that not only were they not compliant in those countries, and then we also looked at some of the things they did in the U.S. and Canada as well. We realized that there's just a lack of understanding. When we talked to the payroll leaders in that organization, they said, "Well, Google or ChatGPT said we can do this," and their payroll partners weren't asking the right questions. And so I gave recommendations of what, things that they can do to implement change. That they would have to make those changes from a compliance perspective. But here's the thing: a good leader, a good project manager, or a good payroll provider are going to ask those questions and challenge it to ensure that you're setting those things up for success. M&A, if it's going through a two-pay transfer process, if it's going through consolidation of payroll, if it's setting up entities or turning on entities, if it's using an employer of record, or if it's transforming contractors into employees, there's a process and a procedure that you have to do to make that happen. And again, going from chaos to clarity, it's making sure you understand what that looks like, where you're at today, and what plans and steps you need to take to ensure success for your overall end goal. And I think that's just putting together a good plan. Do not rush. There are ways that you can get things done. If you, for an M&A perspective, you want to get a deal closed, great. Look at ways that you can leverage things like an employer of record, things like, keeping those contractors and a plan to transition them out. How do you put, and then look at timelines to get those things in place. Don't rush because you think you're knowing something. Ask questions, look at the partners that you're working with, and leverage them to help put a plan together.
Yeah, sounds good. So obviously, I don't want to be the person that asks all the negative questions, but it might be a theme. But what sort of tends to break first? Is it like the people, process, or is it technology?
Well, I think it's a combination. So I think, again, as we mentioned earlier, change is scary for a lot of people. Also, when you think about business transformation, I'm going to use the scary word that everyone is using right now is AI, and how that's going to change things for businesses. And is that going to make me lose my job if I'm leveraging if we leverage AI? I think there's a fear component behind it, not only for just someone's role, but also overall for the change and what that looks like. And when someone says, "This is what I do," 90% of my job is doing this. And if I can reduce that by 50%, what does that mean for me? What am I going to do? Well, here's a really good thing. If you want to be more strategic in a business, if you want to learn how to upskill, how do you actually become more strategic in regards to the conversation with leadership? And how do you actually be able to sit at the table? How can you, if you're not in leadership and you're a specialist, how do you work with your team as well to process improve? How do you actually look at ways to have leverage your time? It's not just processing payroll. Have you thought about compensation management? Have you thought about reporting and how that actually strategy of actually where the company's expanding to? those are things that payroll can actually add value to, not just being an administrative department, but actually looking at the information that they're submitting and processing, and then bringing that to the leadership team to be part of the overall strategic initiative.
It's like the KPIs and understanding the good and the bad
Correct.
on that side. We will come back to globally towards the end of today's session because you're doing a fantastic job. I'm not sure how you're going to answer this question. Is one global payroll provider always the answer?
So I'm a little biased here, and I'm going to be a little biased, and I'm going to be very transparent on that because I do believe that having centralization, I think, is really important. From an employer perspective, from HR, you want to have processes that are streamlined. So you want to make sure your employees have a similar experience when they're onboarding. You absolutely want to have what I call a global experience, global but local experience, but you want to have some type of level of expectation of what employees are going to experience, if it's onboarding with you, if it's how they're going to get payroll, how you're submitting payroll. You get when you consolidate, you do have an opportunity to be able to truly manage kind of process procedures because you're not working with multiple vendors. So I do believe that consolidation is important. I've heard horror stories as well where companies have consolidated and they felt like they were losing the local component. So when you're working with a partner, you need to really dive into what that means for and how they're going to support you, both on a global perspective, so from a corporate perspective, visibility perspective, but then also from a local perspective, what local knowledge do they have? How are they going to be able to support you? Payroll is, especially on the international side, is very much tied to HR and rules and regulations, employment agreements, etc., and collective bargaining agreements. And so you need to have someone that really has that local knowledge, but at the same time can provide a global experience. We've realized that managing or hiring and paying employees, it was roughly about 80% is across the board is the same, roughly about 80%. It's the 20% delta that people get stuck in. And so if you have a partner that really understands that and is leveraging that localization component of it, I think it's really important to partner from that perspective. But I actually do think consolidation is, look, I have been head of HR. I remember when I was working with multiple partners in my past, and it just I didn't have the same experience. My employees didn't have the same experience because it was not consistent with technology or kind of process and procedures. I've also run and started companies. I had my last organization before I sold it. We were in 167 countries, and one thing we did was we partnered with payroll providers to actually process our actual payroll, and that was really important because we were like, man, this is not consistent. And so when we developed globally here, we looked at all of that experience, my HR experience, my payroll experience, my entrepreneur experience, my supporting client experience, and said, how do we actually process this? And that's why we built our gross to net engine. That's why we wanted to have more consolidation. Melanie, I'm a person that likes direct control from that. And so building something that didn't rely on those third parties, but really allowed our client base to have the globalization knowledge, understanding process and procedures, and where we need to leverage that knowledge, we hired in or supported with either legal or HR or accounting services to support that, to make sure we fully comply.
And that local knowledge is really important. So what we've found, what I've heard over the years, is where you've got company using a local company, then they want to go global, use one provider, and then they really see the difference between that global provider and the ICP that they once used, and that some of the failings from the global provider and actually missing the expertise of the ICP that they may have used for many years. So, I do agree with you there. You really need to have an understanding of who your global provider is using.
Yeah, and I think part of that as well is understanding how they validate information. Payroll is sometimes up to interpretation in certain countries, and so making sure they're understanding that, making sure they're communicating that with you. Their payroll can change by industry. It can change by company size. It can change based on the demographics of your employees. And so, someone that really understands that, or a platform that really understands that, I think it's really important. So, centralization, I think, is important, but I keep getting back to the term global. You need something that's both global and local. So, global.
I'm going to have to ask you, do you reckon you invented local? Did
Uh,
EO?
I will say that I heard it before. I did not invent local, but
Oh,
I think I use it. I use it all the time. People, I use it so much. People, a lot of people don't hear about. It, but I think I love the term because it's not just about being global. I think that I think that's the one thing that's a little sets us apart. It's for us when we built our platform. We sat and we sat for years just making sure we understood the legislation in every single country, the tax authorities, how we actually leverage AI to connect with that. How do we make sure we stay up to date? How do we validate that information? That local experience is so important for success. And I've just heard, another. I give all these examples because we're talking to a lot of people, but we had another experience where someone came in and said, "Hey, I was told I can convert all my employees to contractors," and then they got in a lot of trouble and they realized they couldn't do that, not because the employees who soon became contractors weren't happy because they had more money in their pocket, et cetera, but it was when a situation for maternity leave came in play that actually created a huge disruption because this employee, this contractor who was told nothing was going to change in her compensation, she was, I think at that time, 4 months pregnant. She assumed that she was still going to be paid for maternity and her maternity leave. And she found out later on that that was not the case because they came back and said, "You're a contractor." So it's not just about payroll processing, it's really understanding the rules and regulations and what people are entitled to as employees and for that. So that transformation, I mean, it ended up costing them millions of dollars because it created up a big case in I think it was in Spain, and then they were audited for all their employees. I think they had over 100 employees in Spain, so they became a big issue, and they had to then convert everyone back to employees. So just really understanding the local component of that. What's the rules? It's not just 1 plus 1 is 2 for payroll. It's really okay. What does this impact when someone's on leave? What happens when someone is new? What does a proration look like? What does a 13th, 14th month look like? What does a termination look like? Those are things that I think are really important from a localization perspective for payroll processing. It's just not just numbers.
well, we have a question. So, Patrick, thanks for sending this over. How do you ensure trust competence when transforming or moving suppliers? It's actually a good question.
So great question. So one thing is there's got to be a validation point in every process in a project. Um, you're going to have a project plan. You're going to have deadlines, and you're going to have individuals who are responsible or assigned to certain tasks within those projects. You need to be able to have validation points. How do you validate this information? Things are going to be delayed. Some things may be not calculated correctly. There needs to be a process where both parties or all parties, depending if there's multiple parties in it, are validating that information before you go live. So an example of that is that we have within our system a tool called Projects, which is a project plan where we assign tasks to individuals, and clients can take that and assign that even further to individuals in their organizations. And we are validating the information. So once a task is completed, we are validating it, we are approving it on our side to ensure that it's correct. And there's checkpoints behind that. So if the first three things are not done correctly, you can't implement four because there's a validation for those first three. And so we're constantly putting together project plans where we're holding everyone accountable. We're validating the information. We're leveraging AI to do that even further. And we are making sure that it's transparent in the communication. Again, not having a vendor that's just going to say yes and maybe try to correct it in the background. It's a vendor that's showing you what needs to be done, partnering with you, and making sure that we're holding everyone accountable. So there's just the validation is trust comes from validation, in my opinion, and being and transparent and during this overall process.
So we're coming towards the end of this session. So if you do have any more questions, Rick is very good. He does answer all questions, no matter how hard. So well, actually, maybe not too hard because it's very early for Rick. But if you do have some questions, please feel free to add them to the comment section. So what would you say the red flags are? What to watch out when you are doing a transformation?
A vendor that says yes to everything. I think is one. A vendor ask questions with local. I had a we had a client of the UK, a prospect out of the UK, talk about Brazil and some of the things that they were not familiar with. For example, premium pay for PTO, understanding what overtime looked like, overtime and double time look like for employees. Ask local questions. Ask questions that are challenging. Ask those questions during your RFP process. If you just have a vendor who is just looking to put a proposal in front of you and not actually walking you through the process, not providing solutions to some of the issues you have, I think that's important. Melanie, I've shared with you multiple RFP templates as well. And in those templates, one of the things I recommend is give them scenarios that you've had challenges with that may or may not have been resolved and see how they actually think through that during the process. And if they can provide a solution behind that, because that's going to indicate that right away to you if they're going to be the right vendor, because these are issues that you've had already and you've or still may have, and they need to be resolved and how they're actually going to resolve that. Also look at the hours and their SLA and how fast they're going to return, come back to you if there's any issues. Payroll, there are issues. Nothing's ever processed perfectly. So how are they going to support you behind that? And then also the last thing I would say is how do they hold themselves accountable? It's very clear in contracts, and I know. eh, like what they're responsible for. I've had one thing, a big clause that I would be wary about with contractor or with payroll providers is they can give you advice, but if you take it, you're responsible for it, not because they gave you that advice. And so asking them what that means. What do you mean if you're giving me tax advice, I'm expecting you to provide that correctly. I'm going to go with your recommendation. Those are things that you need to, those are pretty big red flags when I see it in contracts. If they're saying, hey, we'll tell you what to do, but if you do it, then you're responsible for it. uh, those are things that I would, that's not a really good partnership from that perspective. So ask the right questions, challenge, go through an RFP process. It doesn't have to be a long process, but just go through a process. And then also the last thing I would say is speak to multiple people within the organization. Make sure you're getting the same answers. I think was really important. And then also make sure that you have a partner that's willing to challenge you, because if you're looking at business transformation as a whole, you need to be able to have someone that's not going to be a yes person.
One of the things that I've sort of heard quite a lot recently is where people, the community, are using the same vendors, but they're having different experiences. So you'll have one company that's having a fantastic experience, another company that's going, okay, well, I haven't had that experience, I don't get that sort of support. So I think it's important to really speak to everyone in the payroll community just to understand what everyone's getting as well, what service, I suppose.
Well, you're only as good as your account manager. I think, this is where it comes to process and procedures. A good payroll company or a technology firm, they're going to have either workflows that they can share with you within their platform and they can demo that out for you. They can walk through kind of SLAs. When you're asking for references, always ask for, everyone's going to give you references of their most happy clients. I always say ask a reference of a client that wasn't happy and how you solved it. Because it happens, right? Payroll is not always processed correctly, but if there's a problem that comes up, that's the reference you want to hear. Like, how are they going to help me when something comes up, and how do I make sure that I know that they're going to be able to help me? You're only as good as your payroll provider, as your payroll specialist or your account manager. But how you as a business are going to make sure that I'm set up for success? That's really I think that's the true reference that you want to hear.
And that's such a good point, because everyone in the payroll industry knows that payroll is not perfect, especially if you have a global payroll, even, just one singular payroll, it's never going to be perfect. And that's so right. How does your vendor, deal with an issue? How quickly is that sorted? How quickly can you get in touch with your account manager? Just to deal with that. We ran a survey a few years back, actually, just about customer service. What was your customer service? How did you feel about your vendors? Just purely because everyone was hearing about tech, and actually what happens when things do go wrong and how quickly. So there's some interesting results from that. I think we should run another one soon, because that was a few years ago. So just to sort of leave it on a positive, what does transformation actually look like when it's good, once it's happened?
Well, There's going to be a savings on time. There's some more visibility on the information that you're looking at. I think data is key. Data is more important or more valuable than gold these days. And so you're able to look at streamlined process and procedures. I'll give an example of something we recently did for a customer. We had a customer that was in Asia. They were in 12 countries in Asia. It was about 5,000 employees. And they were using different vendors for every single country. We put together, and there was no visibility. They had it. They had their HCM. They were using Workday, but some countries were using Workday. Some countries were not, and they didn't know how or what they wanted to do. We sat down with them and said, "Okay, before we do implementation, what are you looking to accomplish? Do you want Workday to be your system of record? Do you want Globally to be your system of record? How do you want how do you want data flow? Do you want employees to access their information from Workday? Do you want them to access their information from our platform? Do you want to submit payroll through Workday, through our platform? Do you want to submit payroll through us?" Asking those questions and helping putting together a plan. We then realized with them that they wanted to focus on Workday being their centralized system, and then they wanted only if they're submitting payroll or if they're time and attendance to flow directly through our platform. Then we put together an action plan to be able to make sure we implemented that. So then we looked at and how many data fields they have in Workday, what's missing in Workday, what do we need to make sure we account for, what do we need on our side. We help implement those data fields. We then put together a way that we can put process and procedures and training for the teams. So we actually recorded training videos for their payroll teams of actually how to process payroll within our system, and how they're going to report that. Then we also looked at reporting, trained them on reporting, and then we looked at how we actually implemented that with employees. Now it made it a lot more simplistic for them because they were able to now have process and procedures of how they're going to onboard employees, where they're going to submit payroll, how they're going to submit time, if it's for hourly employees, and then from there, it gave them a lot more. I think it gave them like 8 days back in their month of actually how they were processing. So instead of using multiple systems to onboard employees in different directions, they now have a centralized way of onboarding within their organization. They have a central way of processing payroll and then reporting and then funding payroll. And that was something they didn't have before. They had, so many different processes by country. They had different experiences by country. And even better enough, we had a couple employees who went from different countries. They moved to different countries within the organization. And they said before, when they saw that, they had different experiences. And now they saw that there's a lot more simplistic. And it's the same experience no matter where they are. Obviously, there's local nuances, but it's a very simple experience or streamlined experience now because of that. So it was taking the time to actually sit down with them, to implement it, and then execute it.
Oh, we have one more. So we're coming to the end, but we've got another question. So I will say, I can imagine that was really stressful before, like how they had it before. So here we go. Right. Talking about measuring service and service quality, e.g. payroll accuracy, what metrics would you use to assess this? And what would be minimum, acceptable, good, excellent service look like?
Well, I think payroll has to. I'll take a step back from that. I think payroll has to be accurate, and I think our SLA is 98%, but I always aim for 100. You have to payroll has to be like this. This is individual livelihood. It impacts the individual livelihood of employees. Excellent is where it's very streamlined. The information that you're entering, no matter where you're entering it from, if it's from your HCM, if it's from uploads, if it's from time and attendance solutions, it needs to be able. It's garbage in, garbage out. So you need to make sure you have a process where the data is flowing and it's the same kind of process. So what's your system of record from there? Validation and payroll, I think is really important. So even though we have our own gross net engine, we are very focused on streamlining that. We have to have a human in the loop, so we're validating that as well. So not only when our clients submit payroll, we're also validating it as well before we actually finalize it. So making sure that we're checking that. And then when it comes to the actual execution of that, it's how I look at it is, was payroll submitted on time? Um, do you have to run another off cycle? I think if you're running a lot of off cycles, then payroll's not good. It's not good processes and procedures internally. And the third thing is, did employees get paid on time? Were taxes paid on time? And do you have visibility to that? Did that information go into your accounting system simplistically without having two manual keys? So really, it's your workflow and your validation of that and making sure everything's been paid. Things happen. employees change their bank accounts. Sometimes they don't get their direct deposits. How do you ensure that if that comes up, how do you make sure it's rectified the next cycle? I think that's really important. But it's just the validation piece. If your goal is on-time payroll, on-time reporting, single system, streamlined, synced information, then that's how you can hold yourselves accountable from there.
Wow, that's a good way to end today's session. So thank you so much for everyone that attended today and got involved. So before we go, I missed some of the dates on the Globally World Tour. There was some of our events hit when you were doing your world tour. So how did it go, and how's things with Globally?
Yeah, so the world tour was in London, Barcelona, Dublin, Amsterdam, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. It was great. We really got to hear from HR and payroll professionals, hearing what some of the challenges they were having. It actually validated a lot of what we were building here at Globally. So, look, I'm the type of CEO and visionary that likes to sit down with customers. I want to hear what they need. Like, I want to create painkillers. I don't like to create pain at all. Like, I like to figure out how do we solve these problems. And so it was really good and validating, of what we were hearing in the industry. I think the one thing that we kept hearing is that transformation is, a little scary. And, we heard a lot of times that companies were failing at that. And again, they named some really large, well-known organizations, with that business transformation. I think it's, again, when having those conversations, it's making sure we put those processes in place. And when we've actually brought in some of those clients, so that's really great, from those events. But it was great. We're going to do some more of them. We're planning to do more next year. We're going to be in Asia this time go around. The next time we do the road shows. But it was honestly a very humbling and amazing experience to hear just from everyone that came. We got to have everyone. We got to do it again, Melanie, because especially the one we did in London and Dublin were great when you were there. But just hearing from people, of what they need, what payroll needs,
Yeah.
not just what we think payroll needs, but what actual payroll professionals need, I think was really, really powerful, and it made us. We went back to the table on a number of things. We updated some of our roadmaps. We took a lot of the ideas that we heard, because we want to constantly look at process improvement, even with our own selves, and making sure we hear what the market needs. And so, there's some amazing things coming out soon, with Globally, based on some of those things that we actually heard from the World Tour.
Well, I have to say, I have missed our discussions, Rick. So I really do enjoy these, and thank you for the person that said excellent discussion. We always love a bit of love back from everyone that watches it. But if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Rick, they can via LinkedIn, can't they, or the website. So we're chatting again in about a month's time. So I'll share that. So really looking forward to it. And yeah, I really enjoyed the time spending with you on your world tour. So hopefully I'll get an invite for next time. But hopefully you'll be speaking at some of our events coming up towards the end of this year. So we'll be doing a little bit more together. But thank you everyone that's joined today, and hope to see you at the next one. So thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Thank you, everybody.